Good evening, and welcome to Nox Historia. Tonight we travel 1,000 miles down the Nile, through the Egypt of the Romans. Put the day down now, all of it. The parts that went well, the parts that did not. The things you meant to finish and did not finish. None of it is wanted here. The lamp is low. The room is holding its warmth around you. There is nothing left for you to do tonight, except lie still and let your breathing find its own slower rhythm, one breath at a time, with no effort behind any of them. Let your shoulders go heavy. Let your jaw unclench, and your hands lie open, and your legs be as heavy as they want to be. We are going a very long way tonight, and you do not have to move an inch to come with me. Out ahead of us, across a great many centuries, a river is moving north through a warm, dark country at about the speed of a person walking. It has been doing that all day. It will still be doing it when the sun comes up. It does not need anyone's attention to keep going, and that is more or less the pace of this entire night. So picture yourself lying on the deck of a riverboat, broad, low, wooden, still warm from the afternoon, a blanket under you, and another folded near your feet in case the small hours turn cool. One lamp somewhere behind your head, turned down to almost nothing. Palms on the bank, black against a sky that is still faintly apricot in the west. Nothing is expected of you out here. You are not the pilot. You are not the crew. You have no watch to stand and no rope to hold. You are a passenger, and every mile of this voyage is downstream. Let me tell you where we are, because tonight it matters more than usual. The year is about 130 of the Common Era. The emperor is Hadrian, and Egypt has been a Roman province for 160 years, since the year 30 before the Common Era, which is long enough that nobody standing on this quay has ever known it to be anything else. This is not the Egypt of the pharaohs. I want to be very clear about that, because it is the whole point of tonight. Nobody is building a pyramid. Nobody has built a pyramid in this country for an extraordinarily long time. There are no chariots. There is a governor answerable to Rome, and tax reckoned in grain, and Greek spoken in the offices where the paperwork happens, and Egyptian spoken everywhere else, in the lanes, at the ovens, on the water, and in the temples, which are open and lit and working. Priests are still carving hieroglyphs into stone, exactly as their great-great-grandfathers did. Now here is the thing almost nobody is ever taught, and I would like it to be the last hard fact you hold before you start to drift. Far downstream, at the place where the valley widens out toward the sea, 3 enormous pyramids stand above the desert edge. To the people on this deck, the crew coiling rope behind you, the pilot testing his steering oars, the merchant settling his baskets, those pyramids are already about 2,600 years old. Take a moment with that. It is a longer stretch of time than the one lying between this deck and you tonight in your own bed. These are not the builders. These are the visitors. They come up the river to look at old things, and they hire local guides who tell them stories of varying reliability, and they ask which one is the biggest, and this is the part that undoes me every time. They carve their names on the monuments while they are there. ancient Egypt was already unimaginably ancient to the ancients. We are joining a sightseeing trip that is itself 2,000 years old. You do not need to remember any of this. If you happen to fall asleep, that is exactly what this is for. Come up to the rail with me then, while there is still a little light to see by.
We are at Thebes, on the east bank where the town meets the water. Behind us, set back from the river, are the great temple enclosures, walls of mud brick as thick as a house is wide, and inside them stone courts and forests of painted columns, and the vast precinct of Amun at Karnak with its avenues and its obelisks, all of it centuries old already, and all of it still in use. Smoke from the evening incense is going up somewhere behind those walls, thin and blue-gray, and you can smell it faintly from here, over the smell of dust and donkeys and warm bread. This is not a ruin we are standing beside. It is a working religious complex on an ordinary weekday evening, and the priests inside it are going about the last of the day's business. The quay itself is quietening down. Grain sacks stacked and counted, bundles of green fodder, jars in rope cradles. A man is folding a length of matting with the unhurried competence of someone who has done it 10,000 times. Somebody is laughing further along the wharf, too far off to make out the words. There are moored boats nose to tail down the bank, their masts leaning slightly, their timbers ticking as the heat goes out of them. Nobody is in a hurry. In this country, hurry has never made the river go faster. Behind the wharf, the town runs back into the dusk in low mud brick, flat roofs with bundles of stock stacked on them, a lane narrow enough to touch both walls, a sycamore fig gone almost black in the failing light. Thebes is not the capital of anything anymore. It has not been so for a very long time. What it is now is a market town with the most spectacular monuments in the province standing at the end of its streets, and people who live perfectly ordinary lives in the shadow of them, and a steady trickle of well-off strangers coming upriver to stare. Now turn a little and look west, across the water, because that is where the light is going. The far bank is a long, flat plain of fields, and then a line of cliffs behind it, and the sun is dropping toward those cliffs and turning the whole face of them the color of a ripe apricot. The green of the fields goes deeper, the palms turn to cut paper. Every wall and every stone over there has picked up that gold, and for about 10 minutes the west bank of Thebes is the most beautiful thing in the world. And then it will begin to cool towards violet and gray, and the first stars will come. There is something standing out on that plain that we are going to go and see later tonight. Not yet. Let it wait for the dark. Now turn and look at the boat that is going to carry you. She is broad, broader than you expect, and shallow, sitting low and flat on the water, like something designed by people who understood that this river is wide, slow, and in no way interested in drama. One short mast, one wide sail furled along its yard, no keel to speak of. At the stern, instead of a rudder, 2 long steering oars lean out over the water on their posts, and the pilot rests his forearms across them, the way you might rest against a gate. Underfoot, the deck planking is warm and slightly gritty with river dust. The whole hull creaks gently, once, as somebody shifts their weight amidships. And this boat has a lovely secret in her construction, which I will tell you now while you are still awake enough to enjoy it. About 600 years before tonight, a Greek traveler named Herodotus came to Egypt and wrote down what he saw. and among much else, he described a particular kind of Egyptian cargo boat. He called it a barges. He said it was built in a most unusual way, not framed first and planked after, in the manner every other shipwright he knew would recognize, but assembled out of short lengths of acacia wood, laid up in overlapping courses, rather like the bricks of a wall, pinned together with long pegs and caulked with papyrus. He was quite specific about it.
And for century after century, scholars read that passage and quietly disbelieved him. It sounded wrong. It sounded like a traveler repeating a tale he had not understood or embroidering one he had. No boat built in that fashion had ever been found anywhere. Herodotus, who is a wonderful writer, has always had a reputation for being a slightly unreliable one, and this looked like more of the same. Then divers went down into Abu Qir Bay off the Egyptian coast into the drowned wreckage of a lost port city called Tonis Heraklion, and among the ships lying on the seabed there, they excavated one that has since become known simply as Ship 17. And when they mapped how she was made, the short planks, the courses, the long pegs, the construction matched what Herodotus had written, closely enough that the argument was effectively over. He had not made it up. He had described exactly what was in front of him, and it took the better part of 2,500 years and a team of underwater archaeologists to hand him back his good name. Feel the planks under you now. Somebody wrote them down, and somebody else believed him at last. Here is the thing about this river, and if you learn only one fact tonight, I would like it to be this one, because it is the loveliest. The current runs north, always north, off the highlands far to the south, down the whole length of the country toward the sea. But the prevailing wind here blows the other way. It comes down out of the north, steady across the delta and up the valley most of the year. So the Nile is a road that works in both directions with no effort at all. If you want to go south, upstream, you raise your sail and let the wind push you against the current. If you want to go north, downstream, you take your sail down and let the water carry you. That is the entire system. There is nothing else to it, and it has been true for as long as anyone has fluted anything here. And the Egyptians built that fact right into their writing. In hieroglyphs, the sign for traveling south is a boat with its sail up. The sign for traveling north is a boat with its sail down. Think about that for a moment. The geography of a whole country folded into two little pictures, so ordinary that a scribe could draw them without thinking. Every school child learning to write here learns the river at the same time. We are going north, so tonight the sail comes down, and it stays down, and the river does all the work between here and the sea. And let me set your mind at ease about the road ahead, because it is genuinely easy. There are no cataracts north of Thebes. All the rocky, broken, difficult water in Egypt lies upstream of us, at Aswan and far beyond it, and we are not going that way. From this quay to the Mediterranean is something like 1,000 miles of unbroken, slow, deep, smooth water, and not one rapid in the whole of it. Nothing to fear, nothing loud. This is a long drift, and honestly, it is not one night's work either. A boat going down from Thebes to the delta takes many days, and the nights of a voyage like this run together into one long, gentle dark. So let them run together. Let tonight be all of them at once. The ropes come off the mooring posts, and it is the quietest departure you have ever been part of. No shouting, one low word from the pilot, and a man on the bank lifts a loop of rope off its post and drops it aboard, and someone coils it without being asked.
The sail comes down off the yard in a soft collapse of linen and is gathered in and lashed along the spar, and that is the last we will see of it. Down for good, down all the way to Alexandria. There is a moment where the boat sits still against the bank, not yet belonging to the river, and then the current finds the hull and takes it and turns the bow slowly, patiently northward, the way you might turn a sleeping child onto their side. That is all it takes. Nobody rows. The pilot leans on his steering oars just enough to hold the line, and then leaves them be. The water goes along the planks with a sound so soft you have to want to hear it, and mostly you will not. What you hear instead is the warm air moving over the deck, and the rigging shifting once against the mast, and palms combing that air somewhere off to starboard, and the crew talking to each other in low voices about nothing much, and behind all of it, the enormous quiet of a country going to sleep. Look back now while the lamps of Thebes are still worth looking at. Lights along the quay and lights in windows, and the deeper dark of the temple walls where the enclosures block out the stars. A dog somewhere, a last snatch of somebody's song. The town is drawing itself in for the night, and it is getting smaller, and it is doing that without any drama at all. Just less of it each time you look. The lights closing up together, the sounds going thin and far. And then the bank is only shapes. Reeds, palms, the low black line of a village, a single fire out in the fields that somebody is sitting beside. The west cliffs have lost their color entirely and become a darker piece of the sky. The stars are coming out over the whole width of the valley now, thick and unhurried, more of them every minute. Let the deck hold you. It is warm, it is steady, and it will be warm and steady all night. There is nowhere for us to be at any particular hour. The river knows the way, and has known it a good deal longer than anyone aboard, and it is carrying us north at walking pace through the dark, past a country that is still, quietly, entirely itself. Thebes is behind you now. The lamps of it are going out one by one along the quays, the way a town settles when there is nothing left to be done until morning, and the boat has already found the middle of the river where the water runs deepest and slowest. The sail is down and lashed along its yard. It will stay down all the way to the sea. Nothing aboard is working tonight except 2 steering oars and the current under the hull. Come to the left-hand rail with me, the western side. Rest your hand on the timber. It is still holding a little of the afternoon in it, and it will give that warmth back slowly for another hour yet. Out there, past a black band of palms, lies the west bank of Thebes, the side of the river where the old kings put their temples, on the reasoning that the sun goes down that way, and so, in the end, does everything else. You cannot see much of it. That is fine. There is no need to see it well. What the moon gives you is a long, low line of walls and gateways standing back from the fields, mortuary temples, one after another, raised by rulers who had already been gone 1,000 years and more before anyone on this deck was born. Some are still roofed, some are quarried down to their foundations, their stone carried off centuries ago to be a wall somewhere else. 1 or 2 have villages living inside them now, mud brick tucked in between the columns, a dog complaining about something far away, a single lamp left burning in a doorway at this hour. Behind them the ground lifts and the green stops. It stops absolutely. You can walk out of the crops and into the desert in one stride, and people here have been doing exactly that on their way to work for as long as there has been work. Beyond the last field, the cliffs stand pale and blank in the moonlight, and folded away somewhere in them is a dry valley where kings were laid to rest a very long time ago. That is all it needs to be tonight, a quiet valley, out of sight, with warm air coming down off the rock. We are not going there, we are going north, and then out on the flat ground where the fields run widest, two shapes come clear of the palms.
Look for them low. That is the mistake everyone makes. You expect a monument to be up on the ridge with the temples, and these are not. They are down on the floodplain, sitting in the crops, with a field ditch running somewhere near their feet. Two seated figures, side by side, facing east across the river towards the place where the sun will come up. Each is about 18 meters of quartzite. Each is one man, hands laid flat on his knees, looking out over your head at something a long way off. The stone deserves a moment. Quartzite is punishing to work, hard, glassy, unforgiving of mistakes, and the blocks are thought to have come from a quarry far to the north, hundreds of miles downstream of where you are drifting now, which means they went up the river the hard way, under sail, against the current, before a chisel ever touched them. Somebody looked at that problem and did it anyway. They were made for Amenhotep III, a pharaoh of the 14th century BCE, and they were never meant to stand by themselves. They were a doorway. Behind them lay his mortuary temple, and by every account it was the largest thing of its kind anyone had built at Thebes. Now look past the two figures and tell me what is there. Dark field, a few palms, nothing. The temple has not fallen down so much as left. It was built low, on ground the flood came over every year, and what the water loosened, later builders were happy to carry away. So the two of them sit out there, guarding a gate that is no longer attached to anything, in a field, at night, in the moonlight. And by the year we are sailing through, the year 130 of our era, that is already true for a very long time. Nobody aboard this boat could tell you whose temple it was. They simply know the two big men out in the fields. Now look at the one on the right, the northern figure. Even from the river you can see that it is not quite whole. Something has happened to it from the waist up, and the line of the shoulders is broken. An earthquake was reported here somewhere around the year 27 BCE, and afterwards that statue was left cracked through its upper body. And then it began to sing. Not tonight. It never happened at night. This was a morning thing, and only ever a morning thing, shortly after sunrise, in that first hour when the light comes over the eastern cliffs and lands on the stone. A sound came out of it. The people who heard it kept reaching for the same comparison, a lyre string breaking, they said, or a harp string giving way under tension, one note, struck rather than blown, and then gone. Some heard it 2 or 3 times over, some described a thin, bright ring, some something closer to a voice. Nobody seems to have called it loud. It was the sort of sound you would miss entirely if you happened to be talking. Sit with what that meant. This was not a wonder you had to believe in on faith, or a story about something that once occurred to somebody else. The stone made a sound at daybreak, most mornings, more or less on time, in the open air, in front of anyone who cared to walk out and stand and wait for it. It was reliable.
Not every morning, by all accounts, and not always at quite the same moment, but often enough that a person could plan a journey around it and expect to be rewarded. That is a rare quality in a wonder. Most of them ask you to believe. This one simply performed and let you make up your own mind afterwards. And because it was reliable, people came, from Greece, from Italy, from all over the empire, across the sea and then 1,000 miles up this river, to stand in a field before dawn and listen to a statue for a few seconds. Which brings us to the name and to one of the most human mistakes in the whole history of travel.
The Greeks and Romans who came here did not know they were looking at Amenhotep. Hieroglyphs were still being cut in Egypt in these years. The temples were open, and the priests still knew the script, but the visitors could not read a word of it, and by and large did not think to ask. What they had was a colossal dark figure seated, facing east, that made a sound when the light touched it. So they did what visitors do everywhere. They fitted it to a story they already owned. They had one ready. In the old poems there was Memnon, a hero out of the east who came to Troy, and whose mother was Eos, the dawn. To a Greek eye, the match was almost too neat to argue with. Here was Memnon, and every morning when his mother came up over the hills, he greeted her. In the same poems, Eos weeps for her son, and the dew that lies on these fields at sunrise was understood as her tears. Everything fitted. Nothing about it was true. Wrong man, wrong story, wrong world entirely, by a distance no one could have measured at the time. And the mistake did not merely last the afternoon, it took. These two figures have been called the Colossi of Memnon for 2,000 years, and they are called that in guidebooks today. The right name came back only in the 19th century, when hieroglyphs could be read again, and the cartouches on the throne gave the king up at last. By then, the wrong name had an 1,800-year head start, and it kept its lead. It still has it. Now come closer to the legs. Only in your mind, since we are sliding past out here in the dark, but come close and put your hand flat on the stone, about the height of your own shoulder. It is rough under the fingers, and it is not smooth rough. It is cut. The legs and the base of the northern colossus carry more than 100 inscriptions in Greek and Latin, chiseled there by people who traveled to hear it. They run from the 1st century of our era into the early 3rd, so tonight, in 130, roughly half of them are already there, and the rest are still coming. It is, in every meaningful sense, a visitor's book, the oldest one we have, and it is still legible. Read what they actually say, and you will recognize the species immediately. A name, where they were from, very often a date given by the emperor's year and the day of the month, because that is what you do when you want it on the record. And then the whole point of the exercise, whether they heard it. Some heard it once, some heard it twice in a morning and said so, plainly delighted. Some came out a second day because the first had given them nothing, and wrote that down too. Prefects signed it, officers signed it, women signed it in their own names, not their husbands'. And this November, the November of the year you are drifting through, the court itself is expected. Hadrian is traveling in Egypt with the Empress Sabina, and everyone an emperor brings with him, and the towns on both banks have been talking of little else for weeks, where they will stay, who has been called on to supply what, whether the statue will oblige. Among the party is a woman named Julia Balbilla, a poet of good family attached to the court, and she does precisely what every other visitor did. She has 4 epigrams in Greek verse cut into the stone of the leg,
dated, signed, recording who was present and what was heard. They are still there. You could go and find them tomorrow and put your hand on them. A court poet writing careful verse to leave a tourist's note on a statue that was already close to 15 centuries older than she was. It is worth saying that nobody involved thought of this as damage. Signing a monument was simply part of going to see one, a way of joining yourself to the thing you had come all that way for, and of proving to anyone who doubted you that you had actually stood here. They were not defacing the statue. In their own minds, they were adding to it. And the strange result is that a piece of ordinary human vanity has turned into one of the best records we have of who traveled where in the Roman Empire, and when, and what they hoped to find when they arrived. And yet, here is the line I love best in all of it. Not everybody was convinced. Strabo, the geographer, came here around 20 BCE, only a few years after the sound was first reported. He went out at dawn with a group of people, as you did, and he heard a noise. And then he wrote something that almost nobody writing about wonders ever writes. He said he could not tell whether it came from the statue or from the crowd standing around its base. He did not claim a marvel. He did not sneer at it either. He simply recorded what he had observed and was honest about the limit of it. And that limit has stood there in the record for 2,000 years like a small, held door. We think we know the answer now, and it is quieter and better than a hero. The desert night cools the stone all the way through. Dew settles and works into the fissures left by the damage. Then the sun comes over the eastern cliffs and heats the outer surface very fast, while the core of it is still cold and damp. The stone expands unevenly. Moisture in the cracks turns to vapor. Somewhere in that cracked upper body, something shifts by a hair, or a flake lets go, and the whole thing rings once, briefly, faintly, at more or less the same hour each morning. Dew, a crack, and the sunrise, in the right order. That is the entire miracle, and I think it is a lovelier one for being explainable. It stopped, in the end, around the year 199, not quite 70 years after tonight. The upper part of the northern Colossus was rebuilt in courses of sandstone, work generally attributed to the Emperor Septimius Severus, and meant, as far as anyone can tell, as an honor. Whatever was intended, it closed the cracks. The statue has not made a sound since. It stands out there today, mended and mute, with all those names still on its legs, and no one left alive who heard it. 2 centuries of singing, and then quiet. But not yet. Not tonight. Out in the dark, the stone is cooling as we pass, and the dew is beginning to gather in it. And in a few hours, when the light comes over the hills, it will very likely make its small sound again for whoever has walked out to stand in the field and wait. We will not be there for it. We will be a long way north by then. Come away from the rail. The 2 figures are behind us now, going grey and then going into the general darkness of the west bank, and there is nothing more to look at on that side tonight. The crew have settled. A lamp burns low back by the steering oars, and the men around it talk in the flat, unhurried voices of people who have done this 100 times. Somewhere forward, a coil of rope is being shifted. The timber eases against itself and eases again. Warm air comes off the fields, dry and sweet, full of dust and cut stalks, and somebody's distant cooking fire. Insects far off, palms moving a little, then stopping. The steersman leans on his oar now and then, a small correction, a degree or 2, nothing you would notice if you were not watching for it, and lets go again. There is nothing else to be done. The river is doing all of it. Let it. For a long while there is nothing much to do but let the bank go by.
The sail stays down. The steersman leans on an oar now and then, a small correction, a shift of weight, and then he leaves it alone again, because the river is doing the work and the river knows the way. Warm air comes off the fields. A rope creaks somewhere behind you against wood and then settles and does not creak again. A good way north of Thebes, the western bank flattens and draws back from the water, and out across the dark fields there is a shape that is not a hill, a long, low wall. Above it, a roofline, heavy and level, and one high window with lamplight in it, because somebody in there is still awake. That is Dendera, the temple of Hathor, who is the goddess of love and of music and of the sky, and of a particular kind of gold-colored gladness. Even at this distance, even at night, it reads as something enormous and extremely well kept. Here is the surprising thing about it. It is not old. The place is ancient, worshipped on for thousands of years, but the great building standing out there tonight is new. Its main structure went up under the Ptolemies and then under the Romans, and the vast hall at its front, with columns crowned by the face of the goddess, is younger than the Roman conquest itself. And the work is not finished. There are surfaces in there still waiting for their carvers. There are Roman emperors on those walls, cut as pharaohs, in the old dress, in the old poses, holding out offerings to Hathor, exactly as kings did 15 centuries before them. Egyptian art of the purest kind being made by living hands this year in the reign of Hadrian. You will not go ashore for it tonight, and the inner rooms would not be open to you if you did, because they belong to the priests and to the goddess. But it is worth knowing what is standing out there in the dark while you drift past it. Painted ceilings the color of a deep evening, columns so thick that 4 people linking hands could not get round one, and a broad, shallow stone staircase built with low steps on purpose, because once a year a procession climbs it slowly, carrying the goddess up out of the dark of her temple to the open roof to meet the sun. The whole building is arranged around that one slow walk upstairs. And inside, high in the building, on the ceiling of one small chamber, there is a map of the sky, a circle. Around 50 years before the beginning of our era, somebody carved the whole heavens into that stone. The constellations Egypt had always known, and among them the ram and the bull and the scorpion that had come in from Babylon and from Greece, all of them turning together in one round. It is up there now, a mile inland, in the dark, with nobody looking at it. In 1821, it was cut out of that ceiling and carried to France. You can stand under it today in the Louvre in Paris, on a floor of polished wood, and look up at the same circle the boat is passing tonight. Lean on the rail now and look down. You will not see the color of the water in this light, but you can smell it, and the smell is mild and thick and mineral, brown and green at the same time, like a garden an hour after rain. This is the long tale of the flood. Every summer the river swells and comes up over its banks and spreads itself across the whole valley, and the Egyptians called that season Akhet, the inundation, the beginning of the year. It is not the water that matters most, it is what the water is carrying. Fine dark silt, held in suspension for 1,000 miles,
and when the flood slows and stands, the silt comes out of it and settles across the fields in a fresh, dark layer. Fertilizer delivered by a river, free, once a year, for as long as anyone can count backwards. Egypt is not a country that happens to sit beside a river. Egypt is something the river has been making, one thin layer at a time.
So they measured it. At quays and at temples all down the valley, there are nilometers, flights of steps cut down into the bank inside a shaft, with the wall beside them marked off in cubits so that the height of the water could be read off exactly, like a line on a door frame. Priests read them, officials wrote them down, and the readings were not curiosity. Taxation was pegged to the height. A generous flood meant a full harvest and a full assessment, and a poor one meant relief, and the number chalked up on a wet wall in August decided what a village would owe. Pliny the Elder, writing in the century before this night, set the whole scale out plainly. 12 cubits, he says, means hunger. 16 means joy and abundance. And here is the part that catches people, because it is not how we imagine rivers at all. Too much water was its own disaster. Too high, and it came too late and stayed too long, and the seed went in late or went in rotten, and the ground did not dry in time. The Nile could ruin you by being too generous. That was understood here as plainly as frost is understood anywhere else. Nobody on this boat knows where the water comes from. Sit with that a moment, because it is easy to skate past. Not the steersman, who has worked this river his whole life, not the priests at Dendera, with temple records reaching back further than Rome has existed. Not the prefect in Alexandria, not the geographers in the Mauseon, not the emperor himself. In the hottest, driest part of the year, in a country where it essentially does not rain, the river swells and comes up over the fields, and nobody in the world can tell you why. They have their explanations, and none of them hold. Herodotus, 600 years earlier, went through the theories on offer. Melting snow somewhere south, winds penning the water back, a great encircling ocean, and he was satisfied with none of them, and said so. In the century before this one, 2 Roman officers were sent up the river to follow it to its head, and they went a very long way, and came at last to a marsh with no far side, where the water spread out flat and lost itself in reeds taller than a man, and there was nothing to do but turn round. The Romans made a proverb out of it. To go looking for the head of the Nile meant to attempt the impossible. The answer took 17 more centuries. It was not established until the 19th, and when it came, it was this: monsoon rain, falling in summer on the highlands of Ethiopia, gathering into the Blue Nile and coming down. That is all. The flood is a rainy season, happening a very long way away, in mountains no one aboard this boat has heard of, arriving here on time and out of nowhere anyone can name. Which means the water under the hull tonight, holding this boat up, moving it north while you rest, fell as rain on a mountainside a long way south of anywhere this crew has been, and everyone alive tonight thinks it comes from somewhere else entirely, and it makes not the slightest difference to the boat. You cannot see it in the dark, but you can feel how narrow this country is. Egypt is a green ribbon, a few miles wide, sometimes less, laid along 1,000 miles of river, with desert pressed hard up against both edges of it. There is no fading out, no scrub, no gradual thinning. There is a field, and then there is sand, and the join between them is a line you could step across, and in places you can stand with 1 foot on each.
The Egyptians named the two halves by their colors and used those names for everything. Kemet, the black land, the dark, wet silt where people live. Deseret, the red land, the desert on either side. Black and red, life and everything that is not.
Along the edge of the black land, all night and all day, water is being lifted. The simplest machine on the river does it. A long pole balanced on a post, a bucket hung from one end, a lump of dried mud or stone lashed to the other. A man pulls the bucket down into the water, and the counterweight lifts it back up for him, and he swings it over and tips it into a channel, and does it again, and the ditch fills and the field drinks. Somewhere out there in the dark, a pole is turning on its pivot with a soft wooden groan, and further off, an ox is walking a slow circle, turning a wheel that does the same work without being asked twice. The villages come and go on both hands, low and close to the water. Mud brick, flat roofs, the walls the same color as the ground they were dug out of. A palm grove standing black against the stars. A dog making a remark about something and then losing interest. A doorway with a lamp behind it, and then the doorway is gone. And once, on a low sandbank off to one side, there is a pale shape that resolves slowly into a crocodile, lying full length along the sand with its mouth open, entirely asleep. It does not move as you go by. It has no interest in you whatsoever. In one or two towns down this river, the crocodile is a god, kept in a temple pool and fed by hand by the priests, and visitors come specially to look at him. This one is just a large animal having a good night, and the boat passes, and he stays exactly where he is. And the smell of the place at night is two smells at once, and once you have noticed it, you will not stop noticing it. Dry dust off the desert, warm, faintly sweet, still giving back the heat of the afternoon, and under it, wet earth, cool, heavy, growing. The two of them side by side in the same breath, all the way to the sea. Now, let me set something straight, gently, because it is the thing most people get wrong about this river and this country. There is an idea that ancient Egypt ended, that it ran for 3,000 splendid years, and then Cleopatra, and then Rome, and the curtain came down, and everything after that is a ruin with tourists in it. It is an easy idea to hold because our books are arranged that way, with a chapter that stops. But look at what you have just floated past. At Dendera tonight, the temple is open. There are priests inside on the night duty. The daily offerings are made in the morning as they always have been. The festival calendar is kept. Craftsmen are up on scaffolding with copper chisels, cutting hieroglyphs, real hieroglyphs, correctly formed into new stone, and they will still be cutting them next year. On the back wall of that same temple, there is a carving of Cleopatra with her son, made in the old Egyptian manner, and the point is not that she is there. The point is that the wall did not stop with her. It went on. Emperors were added in the same style by the same trades for generations after she was gone. What changed was the government and the paperwork. Egypt is a Roman province run by a prefect the emperor appoints himself. The tax records and the contracts and the leases are written in Greek because Greek has been the language of administration here since the Ptolemies. But walk off the quay into any of these villages and the language you hear is Egyptian, the same language, still alive, and it is still being written in the old script by the men who serve the gods. And the hieroglyphs do not stop for a long time yet. The last dated hieroglyphic inscription anywhere in the world was cut at Philae, far upstream, in the year 394. That is more than 4 centuries after Cleopatra, and more than 2.5 centuries after this very night. Egypt did not stop. Nothing was swapped out for something newer. It simply layered the way the silt does, and everything underneath went on working. Somewhere in the small hours, the steersman brings the boat in toward a quay.
It is nothing much. A stone landing with worn steps, a village behind it, 2 other boats tied up and asleep. Somebody is awake to take a rope, and there is a low exchange of words, and then a lamp comes down the steps, a small clay one with a wick floating in oil, and its light goes about a body's length and then gives up. Bread is handed aboard, flat rounds of it, still faintly warm. A jar of beer, thick and mild, and closer to food than to drink, which is what everyone in this country lives on. Dates, sticky, pressed into a basket. Sit on the warm boards with your back against something solid, and eat a little, and listen, because there are 3 languages within earshot on this small quay, and they belong to 3 different parts of the same life. An old woman on the steps is talking Egyptian, the language of this valley since before the pyramids, and she is complaining comfortably about somebody's son. A clerk with a lamp is reading out a receipt in Greek, scratched onto a broken bit of pot, because pot is free and papyrus is not, and a potsherd holds ink perfectly well. And down at the end of the quay, 2 off-duty soldiers are trading a few words of Latin, out of habit, the way people do who learnt it somewhere else. None of it is unusual. Nobody here finds it remarkable that the goddess up the road has a Roman emperor carved on her wall, or that the tax on the barley is written in one language and argued about in another. It is simply how the country is, and the receipt on that potsherd may well still exist somewhere, in a drawer, in a museum, waiting to be read. The rope comes off. The quay slides back into the dark, taking its lamp with it, and the river, which has never once needed to be asked, takes the boat north again. The lamp on the quay grows smaller behind us until it is one warm speck laid on a dark bank, and then it is not even that. Nobody talks for a while. There is no reason to. The river has us, and the crew have gone quiet the way people go quiet in the middle of a night watch, when the work is only watching, and the watching is easy. We are into Middle Egypt now. This is the long, flat waste of the country, where the cliffs stand well back on both sides, and the valley opens out and softens. By daylight it is the least dramatic stretch of the whole 1,000 miles. No gorge, no famous view. Fields, and then more fields, and the pale edge of the desert waiting quietly beyond them, like a shore. There is very little to hear. A rope shifts somewhere behind you and settles again. The timber under the deck gives one of those slow wooden sounds that boats make when nothing is wrong. Far off across the fields, insects keep up a thin, steady note that you stop noticing almost as soon as you notice it, and the warm air comes over the rail carrying dust and green things and the faint sweetness of somebody's fire that went out hours ago. Overhead, more stars than you are used to. Pull the blanket up if you want it. The night will not get cold. Off to the west, past the farmland, another thread of water runs more or less alongside us. You cannot see it from the deck. There is only flat blackness and the smell of dust and irrigated ground. It draws off the Nile and carries north through the western fields, and it has been doing that for a long time. The name it goes by today is the Bar Yusuf. Villages have grown along it the way villages grow along any useful water. Towns, too, ordinary towns, with granaries and gossip and a market day. One of them is out there tonight, a few hours' walk west of this rail, lamps out, doors shut, dogs asleep in the warm dust of the road. A middling provincial town in a middling district. It has a temple, a market, magistrates, tax offices, and a truly heroic quantity of paperwork, and no importance whatsoever. Its Greek name is Oxyrhynchus. Today, the place is called Elbahansa.
Hold that name lightly. No emperor made a point of stopping there. Nothing happened there that anyone at the time thought worth writing down, and it is now one of the most important archaeological sites in the world because of its rubbish. Here is how that came about. Stay with me for a minute or two if you like, though you needn't. In the winter of 1896, two young Oxford scholars, Bernard Grenfell and Arthur Hunt, came out to this part of Egypt looking for written material. They were papyrologists, which is to say they read what has been written on papyrus, which mostly means they read damaged things very patiently. They picked this site more or less because nobody else had bothered with it. The town itself had largely gone. What remained, out where the green stops and the desert starts, were mounds, low hills of sand and dust and crumbled mud brick, some of them as tall as a house, and inside them, layer upon layer, everything the town had thrown away across century after century. Broken pots, straw, sweepings, and paper. Not an archive. Nobody had filed any of it. It had simply been carried out past the last houses and tipped over the edge, the way rubbish has always been carried out and tipped. And then the wind had come and put sand over it, and gone on doing that for a very long time. They dug, and almost at once the paper started coming up. Fragments mostly, a corner here, a strip there, some pieces the size of your palm, some no bigger than a fingernail, some whole sheets still creased where a hand had folded them to send. Greek for the most part, the ink still black. And there were not dozens, and there were not hundreds. Over the seasons that followed, that unremarkable town's bins gave up hundreds of thousands of pieces of writing. They packed them into tin boxes and shipped them home to England, and the sorting has never finished. Think for a moment about what a rubbish heap actually is. Nothing in it was meant for you. Nobody writes a receipt with posterity in mind. Everything in those mounds had been kept exactly as long as it was useful and then let go of, which is precisely why it tells the truth. And what is in it is a whole town's daily life written down by the people living it. There are tax returns, a great many of them, because this is a Roman province, and Roman provinces run on assessment. There are leases on land and on houses, contracts of every kind, loans, sales, apprenticeships, marriages, census returns listing who lived in a house and how old they were and how they were related, receipts for what feels like everything a person could possibly buy. There are school exercises, and these are the ones that undo people. A child's alphabet, a line of a poet copied out, the letters wobbling and growing larger as the hand tires, and beside it, in a firmer, steadier hand, the same letter written properly by a teacher to show how it should be done. 2,000 years, and that is still exactly what it looks like. There are medical notes and shopping lists. There are invitations to dinner, brisk and formal and slightly charming, someone asking you to come and eat at a named place, on a named day, in a named hour, in a form so standard you can tell it was ordinary to receive one. And there are private letters, people asking after relatives, people complaining at length about money, people writing to say they have arrived safely and would everyone please stop worrying, people apologizing for not having written sooner, giving reasons, some of which are clearly excuses, sons to fathers, soldiers to mothers, traders to partners upriver, the same handful of things human beings have always put in letters, sent between people whose names would otherwise have gone completely.
Read enough of them, and the town assembles itself around you without ever being described. You learn what things cost, and who owed whom, and which fields flooded well and which did not. You learn that a woman could hold property in her own name and go to law about it. You learn what people worried about at 3 in the afternoon on an ordinary day, which is very largely what you worry about, adjusted for the price of wheat. This is the quiet miracle of the place. We know the ordinary people of Roman Egypt better than we know almost any other population of the ancient world. Not the emperors. We always knew the emperors. The people. And we know them in their own handwriting, the slant of it, the pressure of the pen, the place where they ran out of sheet and squeezed the last words up the side of the margin, exactly as you would. And then, mixed in among the tax returns and the laundry lists, something else entirely started coming out of those heaps. Literature. Lost literature. Menander, the Athenian comic playwright, was admired for centuries all over the ancient world, and then his plays quietly disappeared, copied less, kept less, until scarcely anything remained but quotations of him in other people's books. Substantial pieces of his comedies came back out of the rubbish of a provincial Egyptian town. It is worth knowing how a book was lost, because it was almost never dramatic. A roll wears out. Somebody has to sit down and copy it before it does, and then somebody has to do that again a generation later, and again for as long as the work is wanted. Stop wanting it for 100 years, and it is simply gone, without anyone deciding anything. Most of what the ancient world wrote left by that door, quietly, through neglect, in the ordinary way that things stop being copied. Sappho, too. Her poems survived mainly as lines quoted by other writers, which is a thin and second-hand kind of survival. The dry ground of Egypt has been handing fragments of her back, a few words and half-lines, and occasionally more, in her own meter, on paper that someone once owned and read and eventually discarded. And early Christian texts, among the oldest surviving copies of writings that would go on to matter enormously, sitting there in the sand beside a receipt for grain, because in the 3rd century they were simply more paper in a town where people wrote things down. Here is the part that ought to be said plainly. It is not over. Only a fraction of what came out of those mounds has ever been published. Volume after volume has appeared, year after year, for more than a century, and the boxes are not empty. Somewhere tonight, while you lie here and the bank slides past, an editor is sitting under a lamp with a scrap of brown paper and a magnifying glass, working out one more word of something nobody has read since it was thrown away. There is one more thing this dry country kept, and it is not writing. It is faces. From the Fayum Basin, off to the west and north of us, and from other places across Roman Egypt, come about 1,000 painted portraits, panels of thin wood, many of them no larger than a page you could hold in one hand. They date roughly from the 1st to the 3rd century, which is to say from around now, tonight, and the 2 centuries either side. Some are painted in tempera. A good number are done in encaustic, pigment mixed into hot beeswax and laid on while it is still warm, worked quickly with a brush or a small metal blade before it sets. The strokes stand very slightly proud of the surface, so they take the light, and the color has not faded the way paint usually fades. It has kept its warmth for 1,900 years. They are funerary. Each was painted to go with the person it shows at the end of their life. That is all of it. And now we can leave that where it is and stay with the faces, which is where anyone who has stood in front of them ends up staying anyway.
Because they look at you, not past you, not up at a god, not sideways in the flat formal profile of the old Egyptian style. Straight out, level, into the room, at whoever is standing there. A young man with the first serious growth of a beard and eyebrows that nearly meet.
a woman in gold earrings, her hair dressed in a fashion a specialist can date to within a decade or two, because fashion moved then as well. Someone with a slightly crooked nose that the painter did not tidy up. Someone else who looks tired and faintly amused about it. They are not types, they are people, painted by someone who was looking at them. And here is the promise, which I like very much. You can go and meet their eyes. They hang in museums in Cairo and London and New York and Paris and elsewhere, in ordinary rooms with ordinary lighting. And tomorrow, if you wanted to, you could stand a foot away from a person who lived beside this river in about the year we are drifting through tonight, and look at them while they look back. None of it should have survived. That is the last thing worth telling you before the town falls behind us. Papyrus is a plant. It grows in marshy ground, a tall reed with a stem like a long green triangle. You cut the stem, strip the rind, and take out the soft white pith inside, and you slice that pith into thin strips. You lay the strips side by side, edges just touching, until you have a square. Then you lay a second layer across the first at right angles, and you press it or beat it gently, and the plant's own sap does the rest and binds the two layers into one sheet. Dry it, smooth it with a stone or a shell until it takes ink cleanly, and glue the sheets end to end into a roll. That is it. That is the paper of the ancient world, made of nothing but reed and water and patience. And because it is a plant, it rots. Put papyrus in damp ground and give it a century or two, and there is simply nothing left. Put it in dry sand, above the reach of the water, where it never rains and nothing seeps, and it just sits there, unbothered, waiting. Which means that the reason we can read the shopping lists of a middling Egyptian town and cannot read the shopping lists of a middling town in Roman Britain or Roman Gaul has almost nothing to do with what those people were like, or how much they wrote, or how much they mattered. They wrote as much. They complained about money, too. It rained on them, that is all, except in the odd waterlogged corner where the mud happened to seal the air out and a handful of things came through. So our whole picture of the ancient world, the shape of what we know and the size of the gaps in it, is partly a map of rainfall. We see clearly where it was dry. We guess where it was wet. It is a strange, humbling accident to lie in the dark and think about. Out there to the west, the town is asleep. The mounds are not mounds yet. They are just where the rubbish goes. Somewhere behind a shuttered window, a clerk's desk holds a half-finished letter that will be sealed tomorrow, read once, tossed out within the month, buried by wind, and read again by a stranger in Oxford 1800 years later. Nobody knows. Nobody could. The bank slides quietly by. The river carries us on north towards the old capital and the great stones, and there is no hurry at all. The cliffs have been drawing back for hours, so gradually that you could not name the moment it happened, and the valley has opened out around you like a hand unclosing. There is more sky than there was before. The banks have gone low and soft. The palms stand in loose companies now, instead of single file, and behind them the fields run a good way further before the dry ground begins. Ahead, low down on the water, there is a smudge of light. Not one lamp, and not a village's handful either. A long, faint, uneven wash of it, spread along the bank for what must be a considerable distance. The way a place looks when it is big enough to have neighborhoods and quarters and streets that are dark at this hour because respectable people are asleep in them. That is Memphis. You are coming down on the old capital of Egypt in the last of the dark, And here is the thing to put right before you look at it. It is not a ruin. Nothing about it tonight is picturesque decay. Memphis in this year is a working city, one of the largest in the province, with a river frontage and a customs house and grain barges tied up nose to tail. Strabo, the geographer, came through here a century and a half before this night and found it big and populous, second in the country only to Alexandria itself. It has been the hinge of Egypt since before anyone kept records of why, because it sits exactly where the valley ends and the delta begins, and everything that moves between the two has to pass its door. Come to the rail. You can smell it before you can see any of it properly. Warm brick, animals asleep in their pens, bread somewhere already. Bakers keep unsociable hours in every century. Underneath it all, the flat mineral smell of a lot of wet mud in the dark, which is the smell of Egypt itself, and which you have been breathing all night without noticing. Somewhere in the middle of that low glow stands the great temple of Ptah, the craftsman's god, the patron of everyone who works in stone and metal and clay. Its enclosure is enormous, and it is still open, still staffed, still receiving. And there is a lovely possibility attached to that enclosure. The old name of the house of Ptah is thought by many scholars to lie behind the Greek word for this whole country, the word that became Egypt in your own language. If they are right, then the name half the world uses for a nation of 1,000 miles started out as the name of one temple's front wall, right there in that patch of lamplight. The quays go by slowly on your left, and there is more life on them at this hour than you would expect. A lamp under an awning, 2 men sitting on grain sacks not talking, a donkey shifting its feet. Somebody counts something aloud in Greek, gets to a number, and stops. In the shipping offices along that frontage, the paperwork will be Greek, because the paperwork of this province always is, and the conversation on the wharf below the window will be Egyptian, and neither arrangement strikes anybody here as strange. Now let your eye travel west, away from the town, out past the last of the lights to where the cultivation stops and the desert lifts. There is a long, low ridge out there, paler than the sky is dark, and running along the top of it, strung out for miles, a line of shapes with edges too straight to be hills. That is Saqqara. It is the burial ground of Memphis, and it has been in use on and off for longer than any stretch of ground you will see tonight. The city's quiet neighbor out on the dry side, where the sand keeps things. One shape stands taller than the rest, and it is stepped, quite plainly stepped, 6 great tiers going up and inward, like something built for a giant to climb. That is the Pyramid of Djoser. It was raised in the 27th century before your era, and it is generally reckoned the oldest large stone building in the world. Before it, monumental architecture here meant mud brick and reed and timber, good materials, honest materials, but materials with an expiry date. Djoser's architect, remembered as Imhotep, was the first person we know of to stack cut stone that high and make it stay. Everything afterwards, everywhere, is downstream of that idea.
Around its feet, the ridge is crowded with sacred ground. There are the galleries called the Serapeum, where the Apis bulls were laid at the end of their lives, the Apis being a living animal, chosen by its markings, kept at Memphis and attended there in the flesh, fed and attended and consulted, a god you could walk up to and look at. And elsewhere in Egypt, at Tuna el-Gebel and other places, there are rock-cut catacombs holding mummified ibises in numbers that beggar the imagination, brought there by pilgrims as offerings to Thoth. Behind that lies a whole industry, birds raised in flocks, potters turning out jars by the thousand, priests keeping the ledgers, devotion at the scale of a manufacturing town. I only want you to know the places are there, out on that ridge, in the dark. And hold on to the age of that stepped shape for a moment, because it matters more than it looks. Djoser's pyramid was already unthinkably old when the last pharaohs ruled here. It was old when the Greeks arrived, old when the Ptolemies built at Dendera, old before anybody on this deck had a language. It has watched the whole rest of Egyptian history happen in front of it, from the beginning, without moving. The line of them slides slowly right to left as the river carries you. No detail, just edges against the stars and the ridge going on and on. And now look forward over the bow, north and a little west, and be patient for a moment, because your eyes need to find it. There, 3 of them, 3 enormous triangles standing clear of the desert edge, and here is what will surprise you if you have only seen photographs. They are not brown, and they are not stepped, and they do not look like stacked blocks. They are pale, they are smooth. In this moonlight they are very nearly white, and their faces are so unbroken that the light lies on them in flat sheets, like sailcloth, like a cliff of salt. Each one comes to a fine point. They are still wearing their casing, fine white limestone, quarried from Tura on the other bank, dressed and fitted so closely that the joints hardly take a fingernail, sheathed over the rough core to make one continuous polished face from the sand to the tip. Tonight, almost all of it is still in place. It will be prized off much later and carted away to build other things, because good cut stone is good cut stone. In your own century, a ragged cap of it clings near the summit of the middle pyramid and nowhere else, which means the thing you are looking at from this deck, the shape whole, the shape as it was meant, is a sight the modern world has never had. Now the fact I want you to carry to sleep with you. These were built in the 26th century before your era. Do the arithmetic slowly, because it does not behave the way you expect. To the crew leaning on the steering oars beside you, to the girl asleep under a blanket in the bow, to every person breathing on this river tonight, these pyramids are already about 2,600 years old, older to them than they are to you. The gap between this deck and the men who set those stones is wider, noticeably wider than the gap between this deck and the room you are lying in right now. If you feel that these people are impossibly distant from you, remember that they looked at that hillside and felt exactly the same thing, only more so. Nobody aboard has a story of the building, no family memory, no living trade, no grandfather who knew. Whatever the guides at the foot of it will tell them in the morning is hearsay laid over hearsay. To everyone on this boat, the pyramids are simply the oldest thing anyone has ever heard of, and they have always been there, and they always were. Somebody fed the people who built them, though, and we know a fair amount about how.
Out at the base of that plateau, off to the southeast of the pyramids, and long since buried under sand, lies the settlement where the work was organized, and it has been dug. Archaeologists have turned up bakeries with the great bread molds still stacked, vats brewing, and animal bone in quantities that stop you short, cattle and sheep and goat driven in from estates up and down the country and delivered to the plateau to be eaten. This was a fed workforce, provisioned, rationed, supplied on a schedule by an administration that could move herds across a kingdom to keep a building site in dinner. There is a cemetery there too, on the slope beneath the great tombs, for the people who did the work. Modest, orderly, and pointedly close. You are not put in the shadow of the king's monument for eternity if you are considered nothing. And up inside the pyramids themselves, on rough blocks, in spaces never meant to be seen again, the work gangs left their crew names daubed in red paint. Teams with names, probably rivals, people who wanted it recorded that this particular stone was theirs. So set aside the picture you were given as a child, the whipped multitudes, the massed misery. It is an old story, and versions of it were already being told to visitors long before this night, but the ground does not support it. What the ground supports is bread, beer, beef, rotors, and pride. And in the morning, when the light comes, there will be people down there doing exactly what you would do. Egypt in this century is a destination. Well-off Greeks and Romans come up the river specifically to look at old things, the way one might now cross an ocean for a fortnight of cathedrals. They arrive with letters of introduction. They hire local guides who meet them at the landing and lead them round and tell them tales of varying reliability and who are complained about afterwards in the usual terms. And then, reliably, incorrigibly, the visitors sign the monuments. Their handwriting is still there, Greek and Latin scratched and painted into tombs and temples all over this country, in some places by the hundred. A name, a father's name, a hometown, a date, sometimes a line of verse, sometimes nothing more than "I came, I saw, I was amazed." It is the same impulse that put 100-odd names on the legs of the singing Colossus 1,000 miles upstream, the one you drifted past at the beginning of this voyage. People stood in front of something far older than themselves and could not bear to leave without being part of it. And it goes back further than the Greeks, which is the part that undoes me a little. On the very ridge you have just passed, at Saqqara, an Egyptian scribe left a note on a wall to say that he had come out west of Memphis to walk about and enjoy himself and see the beautiful old monuments. And he wrote that more than 1,000 years before this night. A tourist visiting antiquities that were antiquities already. The educated visitors wrote it up as well. Herodotus came and asked questions and wrote down what he was told. Strabo came and looked and was carefully skeptical of half of it. Pliny compiled. Between them, they left us a guidebook literature about Egypt that is itself now ancient, written by people who were themselves latecomers, describing things they did not understand any better than you do. Egypt was a heritage site 2,000 years ago. The queue has simply never stopped moving. The plateau is drawing astern now. Watch it as long as you like. The pale faces hold the moonlight for a surprisingly long time before the angle takes them, and then they are one flat grey wedge, and then they are the horizon. Ahead, the country keeps opening. You can feel it in the air more than you can see it. The breeze off the bank has lost its edge of hot stone and gone soft and damp, greener, with something faintly salt at the very back of it that you will not be sure of for hours yet. The desert cliffs that have escorted you all the way from Thebes have given up and gone off west, and the fields no longer end at a wall. They just go, dark and flat, until the dark itself ends them. And the river is beginning to divide. Nothing dramatic, no fork, no decision, nothing you would notice if you were not told, only that the channel has grown very wide and very lazy, and off to the right there is a slower arm of water going its own way through the reeds, and beyond it another glimmer that might be a canal or might be the same river gone wandering. From here down to the sea, it will keep doing this, letting itself out into branch after branch across 100 miles of flat, wet country. The birds are different here, too. Not many of them awake, but the ones that are have a different note, longer, wetter, further away, and once, off in the reeds, something large and unbothered resettles itself and goes quiet again. The insects have thinned out. The timber under you gives one of its slow creaks, thinks about it, and stops. Let the deck take your weight. Nothing needs steering yet. The nights of this voyage have begun to run into one another, the way they do on long journeys, and it hardly matters now which one you are in. The sail has been down since Thebes. The current is still doing the work. Downstream, a long way off, there is a sea you have not smelled yet, and a light on an island that has been burning since before the Romans came. The land lets go of you here. For 1,000 miles, this valley has held the river between two shoulders of desert, a green ribbon with a hard edge on either side of it. And now, gently, without any announcement at all, the shoulders lower themselves and go away. No cliffs, no far bank rising into rock, only flat country, black and low and wet, spreading out into the dark, much further than the lamp or the moon can follow. And the river, with nothing left to press against, does what water does when it is finally given room. It divides. Feel how quietly it happens. There is no fork, no swirl, no argument between one channel and the next, only a long, pale island of reed and silt sliding down the middle of the water, and the boat easing along one side of it, and then, some while later, the far side of it becoming a separate river altogether, going off on its own business, under its own stars. The Greeks looked at this country drawn on a map and named it for the fourth letter of their Greek alphabet, the triangle, delta. Ancient geographers counted its mouths and wrote them down, and the branches have moved over the centuries since, silting closed here, cutting through there, so the map of tonight is not quite the map of 1,000 years before it, and not at all the map of now. A river only ever borrows its own shape. Canals go off into the fields on either hand, ruled straight, their low banks catching what light there is. Between them the country is half water and half earth, and not much interested in the difference. Flooded plots, reed beds standing black and soft, a papyrus thicket leaning all one way where the air moves through it. Birds are everywhere out here, and almost all of them are asleep. Now and then something long-legged shifts its footing among the reeds and settles again. A duck mutters 2 fields off and thinks it better of it. There is more life within 100 paces of this deck than there has been all night, and every bit of it is resting.
Then the air changes. Lift your face to it. Somewhere under the warm smell of wet silt and cut green stuff and dust off a crack is something cooler and cleaner and faintly salt, and it is coming ahead of you. The sea is out there. Not close, not yet, but the night knows about it now, and so do you. Barges are moving out there tonight, low in the water, and they are carrying the reason Egypt matters to Rome: grain. This flat, black country is the best farmland in the empire, and the branches and canals threading through it all run the same way you do, north, toward Alexandria, and the sea, and the ships.
In the daylight, the loading quays along these channels are the busiest places in the province. At this hour, they are only a smell of chaff and rope and a lamp or two burning where somebody is waiting for the tide of business to start again in the morning. It goes to the city first and into the granaries there, and then out across the water in season with the grain fleet, a great scheduled migration of ships sailing north for Italy when the weather allows it and laid up when it does not. Rome is a city too big to feed itself. It eats what other places grow, and a central part of what it eats comes out of the mud you are drifting over. The bread of 1,000,000 strangers, a very long way from here, starts as a flat green field in the dark, somewhere off this bow. And here is what that did to Egypt, which is stranger than the grain itself. Every other province in the empire was governed by men from the Roman Senate in the ordinary way, with all the ordinary politics that went with it. Not this one. Egypt was run by a prefect appointed directly by the emperor, answerable to him and to nobody else, and Roman senators were forbidden to enter Egypt at all without the emperor's personal permission. You could not simply come here. A man of the highest rank in the Roman world had to ask. Sit with that a moment, because it is a remarkable piece of nervousness. Whoever held Egypt held Rome's dinner, so the emperors held themselves at arm's length from everyone else, like a man keeping one particular key off the ring and in his own pocket. An entire province, its temples, its towns, its 1,000,000 people, its ancient river, kept apart from the usual machinery of empire because of what grew in its silt. The fields sliding past you in the dark are quietly the most politically delicate ground in the Mediterranean, and not one of the sleeping villages out there has the least reason to think about it. Look north now, over the bow, and give your eyes a little time. There is nothing to see. Flat country, a few far lamps, the reeds. And then, if you keep looking, you notice that the sky above the horizon in that one quarter is not as dark as the sky everywhere else. It is not a light, it is not shaped like anything. It is a faint warmth low down, a place where the black has been thinned, as though somebody a great distance away had breathed on the night. That is Alexandria. You are still hours from it, and you cannot see a single wall or roof or mast, but the delta is so flat and so wide that the city's glow arrives long before the city does. Thousands upon thousands of small fires and lamps and braziers and shopfront lights pooled together and thrown up against the underside of the air. In all the world in this century, there are only a handful of places that can do this. Rome can, Antioch perhaps, and here.
The crew have seen it. Nobody says much. A word or two at the steering oars, an old joke that does not need finishing, but the boat has changed. There is a slight gathering up about it, the way a room changes when people know the evening is nearly over. Somebody coils a rope that did not need coiling. The lamp is trimmed. Ahead of you, the warmth on the horizon does not flicker or move. It simply sits there, patient, getting very slowly stronger, the way the first pale of dawn does, except that this is not dawn, and it is coming from the ground. And then, at last, the light itself. It separates out of the glow before anything else does, a single point, higher than it has any business being, steady and gold. Not the color of a star. Stars are white and cold, and they twitch. This one is the color of fire, because it is fire, a great blaze kept burning at the top of a tower on the little island of Pharaohs, off the shore ahead of you, and thrown out across the sea by a mirror or a sheet of polished metal set behind it.
The tower was raised under the first of the Ptolemies and finished around 280 years before this Roman century began. For a long stretch of human history, it has been among the tallest things standing anywhere on Earth. How tall exactly, nobody now can honestly say, because the ancient and medieval writers who tried to give the figure disagreed with each other wildly. Let it be tall. It is tall enough that the men steering this boat found it before they found Egypt's coast. Think about what that means for a moment, because it is worth more than its height. The lighthouse has been burning for 400 years. 4 centuries of somebody carrying fuel up inside that tower, every night in every season, without a single interesting thing happening. And because of that unglamorous, unbroken, entirely thankless chain of ordinary evenings, a boat in the dark knows where the land is. Every sailor who steered by this light was steering by the diligence of people long dead. It is one of the 7 wonders, and unlike most of the others, it is not a tomb or a statue or a garden. It is a piece of equipment. It was built to be useful, and it has been useful every night for 400 years. The island it stands on is not really an island anymore. A long causeway was thrown across from the mainland to reach it, the Heptastadion, and by walling off the middle of the bay, it made 2 harbors where there had been one, a great harbor on the eastern side and another to the west, so that whatever the wind is doing, some ship somewhere can still come in. That is the sort of city this is. It looked at a bay and a rock and saw an arrangement. The word itself outlives all of it, incidentally. Pharaohs. Centuries from tonight, in languages that do not exist yet, people who have never heard of the Ptolemies will still be calling a lighthouse a pharaoh, a phare, and never once wonder why. Behind the light lies the city, and now you can begin to make out the shape of it, a long, low glitter along the water, mast tops, the pale line of a mole, and lamps in their thousands. Alexander founded this place in 331 before the Common Era, and then went east and never came back to see it. What he left behind was an idea more than a town, a Greek city set down deliberately on the edge of Egypt, facing the sea rather than the river, laid out on a grid by architects instead of grown crooked by habit. You can see the grid from out here, actually, in the lamplight. The streets run in straight lines, and the lights run with them, so the whole city is ruled into long, bright rows. One of those rows is far wider than the others, a great colonnaded avenue running the length of the place, columns down both sides of it, still busy at this hour. The sea wind comes straight in along those streets. That was the point of aligning them so. The city was designed to breathe.
Somewhere in among all that is the Museion, the institution that made Alexandria's name for good, a foundation for scholars with the great library tradition attached to it, the place that set out to gather up copies of everything written in the world and put them under one roof. Whatever remained of that collection by this century, and the ancient sources are not tidy about it, the habit had long since taken. This is a city where people came to read and to argue about what they had read and to measure things. The circumference of the earth was worked out here by a man with a stick and a shadow and some very careful thinking. And listen to what drifts out over the water as you come in. It is a low murmur mostly, the sound 100,000 people make when most of them are asleep and some of them are not. But there are voices in it, and they are not all speaking the same language. Greek first. Greek is the language of the offices and the shops and the schools. Egyptian all around it, the language of the streets and the countryside and the older gods. Latin here and there, from the garrison and the officials.
There is a substantial Jewish community in this city, and has been for centuries. There are Syrians and Nabateans, and men off ships from further east than anyone aboard this boat has been. All of it on the same pavement, under the same lamps, complaining about the same prices. There is nowhere else quite like it, and everyone who lives here knows it. Now let me tell you what remains, while the light on the horizon holds steady, and there is nothing left for you to arrive. The lighthouse kept burning for a very long time after tonight, century after century of it, long past Rome, into a wholly different world. What finally brought it down was not war or neglect, but the ground itself. Earthquakes over and over, taking a piece each time, until by the 14th century the last of it was gone. A fortress was built later on the same rock, and it stands there still in a way, holding the spot. And much of ancient Alexandria, the royal quarter, the palaces along the eastern harbor, is not on land at all anymore. It went down into the water. Since the 1990s, divers and underwater archaeologists have been mapping it patiently in poor visibility beneath a busy modern port. Columns lying where they fell, paving, statuary, sphinxes, a whole grid of stone on the seabed while cargo ships pass over the top of it. And in Abu Qir Bay, not far along the coast, they found something better still. An entire port city, Thonis Heraklion, so completely lost that scholars had begun to wonder whether it had ever existed. It had. It was simply underwater, and among its wrecks lay the odd little cargo boat built of short planks that proved Herodotus had been telling the truth all along. The rest of the night keeps, too. The Colossus still sits out on the west bank at Thebes, with more than 100 visitors' names cut into its legs, and you can read them, and they are exactly as vain and as human as they were when you drifted past them. But it has not made a sound since about the year 199. The singing lasted roughly 2 centuries, and then the stone was mended, and the voice went, and no one has heard it since. The painted faces from the Fayum hang in museums now, in glass, in cities on the other side of the world, still looking straight out at whoever comes. You could go tomorrow and meet their eyes. The papyri out of that provincial town's rubbish heaps are still being edited and published a century and more after they were dug. Someone this year is reading a shopping list for the first time in 1800 years. The zodiac off the ceiling at Dendera is in Paris, and the hieroglyphs did not stop with Cleopatra or with Rome. The last of them anywhere was cut at Philae in the year 394, more than 4 centuries after tonight, by a priest who had no way of knowing he was the last. And the river. In 1970, the Aswan High Dam was completed far upstream, and the flood stopped. Not the water is still there, and Egypt still lives along it, but the great annual rising, the silt spread out across the fields every summer, the season the old calendars were built around, and the Nilometers measured, and the tax collectors watched for, and the whole of Egyptian life had been arranged around for thousands of years. That ended. The Nile you are drifting on tonight is doing something it will not always do. Nobody aboard this boat could imagine such a thing, and there is no reason they should. They are asleep along the deck in a warm dark, on a river that has always come back and always will, as you, perhaps, are sleeping now. You have come a long way tonight, 1,000 miles of smooth water, past a statue that sang, past temples still open and lamps still lit, past pyramids already ancient, past a town whose rubbish would one day give us back its own handwriting. And here, at the end of it, a fire on a tower and a city waiting under it, and nothing at all left for you to steer by or reach for. So let go of the last of it, whatever you are still holding. Set it down on the dark, quiet water, and let it slip away astern, into the reeds and the flat, black fields, and the warm delta night, going the other way now, with no need of you. The light ahead is steady. The deck is warm. The river has done all the work, exactly as it promised, all the way to the sea. Sleep well, and when you are ready to travel again, Nox Historia will be waiting. Good night.